Welcome, and thank you for joining this Oceanwide Expeditions webinar about the Falkland Islands and South Georgia this time. My name is Franklin Braeckman. I'm Marketing and Sales Manager for Oceanwide Expeditions, and I will give you a short introduction to this webinar. But first of all, I'm delighted to introduce you to our speaker for today, Adam Turner. Adam has worked both for the British Armed Forces and the police, but in 2014 he left the police to work as a boating officer for the British Antarctic Survey in King Edward Point, South Georgia, where he spent just over a year. In 2017 he was elected as a Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, and Adam now works as Field Operation Manager for Oceanwide Expeditions. So in other words, he's the most suitable person to tell you everything you need to know about an expedition to the Falkland Islands and South Georgia to be able to make the perfect choice of your next trip. So before we start, I will give you a very short introduction about Oceanwide and the rest of our program. Without getting into details, we have more than 25 years of experience in the polar expeditions. It all started in the 90s when Oceanwide Expeditions took over the activities of the Plancius Foundation. And one of the most important developments since then is the acquisition and building of our fleet of ice-strengthened vessels. An important development, of course, not only for the flexibility that owning the fleet brings, but also for charter possibilities, for example, can be interesting. But it's also meant we increased our capacity quite a lot. So now we own and operate 5 different vessels. The first vessel that you will see on the next slide is our sailing vessel, the Rembrandt van Rijn. Here he is. The Rembrandt has a maximum capacity of 33 passengers in 16 cabins, so ideal for groups, for example. And all cabins are equipped with shower, bathroom facilities. Important remark, the Rembrandt only sails in the Arctic, so I will not elaborate on this during this webinar. Second vessel we have is the Plancius, as you can see on this slide. The Plancius has a maximum capacity of 108 passengers in 52 cabins, which is exactly the same as the next ship, the Ortelius, same capacity as the Plancius, 108 passengers. Now, as you can see on this image, the Ortelius can carry 2 helicopters. These are only used during our trips in the Weddell and the Ross Sea. So this will be explained on another webinar. Our fourth ship and third motor vessel in this case is the newly built Handius. Handius started sailing in 2019 and has a maximum capacity of 170 passengers. And the last ship is the Jansonius, also named after a famous cartographer. Jansonius is actually being built right now. She will be a sister vessel of Handius and sailing as from next Antarctic season in November this year. Okay, now I will give you a brief overview of our main routes. We have 2 seasons in our program. First, we have the Arctic season. Our Arctic season starts in May in Svalbard. We sail around Svalbard between May and September. As from August, so from August to September, we also sail to East Greenland. And after that, from November to April, we sail in North Norway with our sailing vessel, Rembrandt van Rijn, which I showed. So this means we actually have a year-round program in the Arctic. Once the Arctic season is over, the ships sail down to Antarctica, And we also have quite a lot of options there. So from November till March, we have our entire Antarctic program with the Antarctic Peninsula. Other option would be the Weddell Sea at the east side of the peninsula, the Ross Sea all the way to New Zealand, and at the end of the season, the Atlantic Odyssey all the way back north. But of course, today's theme, the Falkland Islands and South Georgia, which is probably the most complete trip we have in our portfolio. So I will now give the floor to Adam to tell us everything about these trips.
Okay, thank you very much, Franklin. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this webinar. As Franklin mentioned, I have a bit of history with the Falkland Islands and South Georgia, and before working for Oceanwide, I did some consultancy work for South Georgia government on different projects, as well as spending some time on the Falkland Islands. So we'll now look in a little bit more detail at some of the main places really within the Falklands and South Georgia. And as Franklin's already explained, we have different route options, and pretty much the Falkland Island South Georgia trips can be viewed as a triangle route heading up to the Falklands, the furthest point being over towards South Georgia, and then dropping back down via the Orkney Islands to the Antarctic Peninsula. So we'll look firstly at the Falkland Islands, and the idea of this webinar really was just to give you a bit more of an insight on what you could expect to see and showcase really our most visited sites and explain the reasons why we choose these sites as well when you come on a voyage with us. So first ones we'll look at West Point Island over here, Falklands, Saunders Island, Carcass, Steeple Jason, which is only visited really on special trips. It's quite out of the way for the other places, but I'll explain more once we get to that page. New Island, and of course the capital of the Falkland Islands, Stanley. So the Falkland Island comprises of 728 small islands. The largest ones here we can see are East and West Falkland, and a lot of the islands are privately owned but open to tourism, and it's very much still a working area with farming. So the first place we'll look at is West Point Island. Now this naturally on the route we'd generally take would sit as one of the first landing sites because of its position on there, and it's a stunning place. It's a natural amphitheatre in the cliffs with a really large stable black-browed albatross colony there. Nesting amongst the albatross, we see here rockhopper penguins climbing straight up a couple of 100 feet from sea level. Also here we'll have the striated caracara, which as a species globally is in some difficulty, but fortunately the Falkland Islands are a stronghold for it, offering the ideal environment for this large bird. The steamer ducks, which are endemic, we'll often see at the landing site, and here we'll also get offered refreshments by the landowners. Very hospitable a nation on the Falklands. For those less able, we also have the option at this site of a Land Rover taxi from the landing site over to see the birds and the scenery at this, this amphitheatre. And it's also a working farm settlement with different livestock there. This is a young penguin chick being moved off of the albatross nest forcibly. And these birds are absolutely stunning, very photographic, and it's one of the favourite sites. It often gets good feedback from our guests because of the hospitality and also because of the scenery and the drama of the scenery where the wildlife is surviving here. Just further along from West Point Island, we find Saunders Island. This is widely regarded among the cruise industry and also among Falkland tourism guides as being the most photographic place on the whole of the Falkland Islands. We have these long white sand beaches, a mixture of different flora as well, and some fantastic wildlife we can see here, including the rockhopper, Magellanic and Gentoo penguins. And there's also a small but increasing yearly colony of king penguins as well, black-browed albatross, and some smaller birds as well. But these are the main things, and it is an absolutely stunning place, and it's where many photographers will actually make a beeline to, and it's one of the favourite places for the islanders to actually visit as well, which gives you hopefully some indication of how pretty this place is. So these beautiful sand beaches with the penguins along there, and the rockhoppers just coming ashore before they make their scramble up to the nesting site. And the Falkland Islands is unique in many ways, not just geologically and in the wildlife we have there, but it's a mixture of nature and household animals, shall we say, such as it being a working settlement again, and the interspecies relationship here between a sheep and the black-browed albatross, just wandering quite happily through, munching on the well-fertilised grass in the colony. And as I said, it's without any doubt the most photographic place on the Falkland Islands. Beautiful turquoise water, white sand beaches, and of course, the wildlife. We move then again further towards Stanley to Carcass Island. And this, without doubt, again, is a top site of international standing for birding. So if anyone is heavily interested in birding or will help to arrange birding groups, this is certainly a place which should feature on the list. So there are some endemic species in the Falkland, and this is by far the best place to see them. If we look here, we see the yellow gorse along this track. If you spent some time walking from the left of the picture towards the settlement to the right of the picture, you would almost guaranteed see these endemic species along this track. The Cobb's wren, unique to the Falkland Islands, is a tiny bird, and there is an abundance of these birds here on Carcass. So to give you an idea of the birds we could see here would be the two endemic species, the Cobb's wren and the steamer ducks. Then moving on to the other bird species of the dark-faced ground tyrant, the Falklands grass wren, the Falkland thrush, long-tailed meadowlark, Falkland pipit, and these are to name just a few. And two different types of caracara are known to nest on the islands as well. And this is such, again, an amazing sight. We have to actually leave the ship by zodiacs to get to a landing here, and quite often we'll be accompanied by Peel's and Commerson's dolphin bow riding alongside the zodiacs. There are different options with the landing here. Sometimes, if need be, we can land right in front of the white building on the right of the picture. But generally we use the actual pier, which is just out of frame to the left. But we also have hiking options here, and there is a beach a few kilometres away we can land at, look at the different seals and penguins, and then actually walk across land into the settlement. Again, such a beautiful location to see these bird species. A place we don't often get to, but on our more especially geared wildlife trips, and this is reason for this is because of the location of Steeple and being some distance away from other suitable landing sites for us to go to. But it's the world's largest black-browed albatross colony, measuring roughly 200 metres deep from the shore inland and around about 5 kilometres long. And it is beyond words. It is absolutely incredible here. And as you can see in the picture, we're able to get pretty close to this colony without disturbing them. And one of the good things with the birds on the Falkland Islands, particularly at places like West Point, is the birds are actually very well habituated to having guests. For generations, there's been guests there, well managed, of course, but they are unfazed by human presence. Obviously, we have to manage this, but it is such a tremendous place for these close, special wildlife encounters. And this is also a good place here to see the southern sea lion. Occasionally we'll see these at Stanley as well on the pontoon, but Steeple Jason is a good place also to see these amongst the rocks and the landing sites. Obviously, each trip can, with charters particularly, can be tailored to different needs, but all of our trips will include a visit to Stanley unless it's requested by charter otherwise. And Stanley is itself a wildlife haven. You can walk around the outskirts of Stanley and see a number of different wildlife, not so much the endemics in Stanley, but certainly a good chance to see the different geese, the steamer ducks, and different marine life as well. And it's the capital of the Falkland Islands, once called Port Stanley, but the official name has always been Stanley. And it's the seat of the elected government. A pretty little colonial appearing city, which by most standards would be the size of a large village or a small town. There's just over 2,500 people living on the whole of the Falkland Islands, and just over 2,000 of these will live in Stanley. It has a cathedral, an actual award-winning museum, several years within the top 10% of worldwide attractions as voted on TripAdvisor. The heritage and the architecture there is fantastic. I've mentioned the wildlife already, and if there are special requests on any of our trips, we have very good relationships. I've known them personally for a number of years with different agents on the Falklands, that if you want to do a particular trip, maybe a visit to one of the cemeteries, a visit to a different location for a particular part of wildlife, we can help you arrange that on board, and it's all very achievable. The whalebone arch and the cathedral. Aerial view of the museum. It's absolutely fantastic. The investment and the results now in the museum are really good to see. And as I said, just a pretty little place. So now we'll move on to South Georgia, which is really a place that needs to be seen in person. Words will never do this place enough justice. And I thought it appropriate really to start off this element with some quotes by the well-known Sir David Attenborough. And research has now shown that the greatest concentration of marine mammals and seabirds on the planet actually breed and live on South Georgia and the islands immediately adjacent. And it is a global rarity. The whole island was devastated essentially by sealing and whaling and invasive species, and is now recovering at a remarkable rate owing to good management of the islands by the South Georgia government. So we will head off from the Falkland Islands and spend a few days at sea, luckily travelling with the prevalent weather conditions. And our first stop will generally be Grytviken. This is to clear immigration and customs there, but also to have an inspection by the government officers on biosecurity. Because of the amount of invasive species that were there, it's their top priority, and we work very closely with them to ensure we don't bring anything else onto the island, which will then cause problems. So we'll have an inspection by the government. And here at Grytviken, we have a museum and a post office. And again, the museum and post office have been heavily invested in and are attractions in their own own right. It's one of only a couple of whaling stations where we could still visit. It was the original whaling station here on South Georgia and has been cleared of any dangerous substance, mainly asbestos, and any loose material has been cleared, so we can go around there. And the other large whaling stations have 200-metre exclusions, so it's good to see the scale of these factories down here in the South Atlantic region. In the foreground on the picture, we also have the cemetery of many whalers, also one from the 1982 conflict, an Argentinian sailor is buried here. But many people will be fascinated and I'd hope know the story of Sir Ernest Shackleton and the Imperial Transantarctic Expedition. And Shackleton had a very strong link with South Georgia, being the gateway to Antarctica. And after he died on the quest, after a to and fro element to it, he was brought back to South Georgia and is buried here. And in the bottom corner of the cemetery, we can see clearly the headstone of Sir Ernest Shackleton. And his right-hand man, Frank Wild, is interred next to him as well. Also from Grytviken, we have the research station at King Edward Point. And behind the church, you'll see a small valley. And that is actually a really, really fantastic walk to a place called Myviken, which is a study beach for different wildlife. And the scenery, again, is fantastic on the walk over Boar Valley. And where we can, we offer this hike. Personally, I always try to offer it because it gives me a chance to retrace old steps and give some local knowledge, if we like, on these routes. So the grave of Sir Ernest Shackleton there. This is the museum at Grytviken. Again, it gives effectively the whole history of the island, different expeditions which have passed through, and what's helped shape the island to where it is today as this wildlife haven. And it's very much been left to show really the scale of what went on there. Again, it's all safe, but we can walk around these old tanks, the old engine workings, the old flensing pan, and see really how these whaling stations operated. Next, we'll look away from the habitat, if we like, of Grytviken and King Edward Point to the wildlife, which is without any doubt the main attraction. I was fortunate enough to spend several days here at St Andrews Bay, and this is the place where, when we look at the BBC and other wildlife documentaries, this is the go-to place for these large aggregations of king penguins. So David Attenborough has openly said South Georgia is one of his favourites, and this is the place he keeps coming back to. And we can see from these pictures why. An estimate, the current estimate is 400,000 breeding pairs of king penguins. And this is pairs. So if we times that by 2, we're looking at 800,000 individual penguins. Most of these penguins will have a chick, and we can see these small brown furry objects are king penguin chicks, the Oakham boys, as they're affectionately known. So straight away, we're looking at around about half of these. We're looking around about 1 million penguins in this area of St Andrews Bay, and it really does, again, need to be seen to be fully appreciated. Pictures will never do enough justice. Here also we'll have different bird life as well, but predominantly with the penguins, southern elephant seals and Antarctic fur seals. This is a view from the water of looking back, and this is just a very small part of the colony. It will actually extend, if we imagine this frame was a panorama, about 3 more of these shots, 1 to the right and two more slides to the left, if that makes any sense. This is just a very small portion of the colony here at St Andrews Bay. And again, it's a beautiful setting, these mountains at the back, surrounded by mountains, with 3 glaciers actually coming down onto the outwash plain. And as recent as 1980s, the glacier fronts would have actually been around about where my cursor is now. We see 2 penguins at the top of a hill to the right of the picture. The glacier front would have been further forward than this, but this has opened up the plain to become an ideal breeding ground. And hopefully this picture will give you a better idea of the scale of St Andrews Bay by panorama. And of course, this would also now bend round to the left further. So all on the outwash plain from the glaciers, a small freshwater lake with glacial runoff, a beach barrier, and then the open ocean. And again, it's absolutely tremendous. And we will always look to get to St Andrews Bay on our Falkland South Georgia trips. The weather on South Georgia is highly unpredictable, but we are fortunate that there is another alternative which we'll look at shortly with the king penguins. But first choice is most certainly St Andrews Bay. And here a fur seal yawning in indifference of the photographer with the penguins in the background. And these, the king penguin chicks. And they make a really curious noise, a very high-pitched whistle as they're learning to communicate, which their parents can recognise, and this then turns into the normal call of the king penguin. But a really curious and sweet whistle you'll hear from the creches when they form. We move along, so I'm starting this presentation at the bottom of South Georgia, if we like, and we're going to work up towards the Bay of Isles area. So Gold Harbour is near to St Andrews Bay, and this is, the best way I could describe this would probably be a staff favourite. So I've been fortunate enough to not only live there, but going back for many years I've not even counted the days on South Georgia, and this by far is my overall favourite place on the island. And this is echoed by certainly about 90%, I would say, of the Oceanwide staff and from other companies, because it's a small area and the density of the wildlife here is absolutely incredible, and it's a good mixture of wildlife. But this is the place where, again, we'll look at Attenborough and the BBC documentaries, where they will come and film these large southern elephant seals and their different rituals. The largest seal in the world, weighing up to 4,500 kilograms, and they are huge, and they like to fight each other for the breeding rights to control a harem on their small area of beach. And this is one of the best places, or in fact the best place on South Georgia to see this. We see it in other areas, but the concentration of it here is fantastic. It's also a great place to see the light-mantled sooty albatross. They nest up in the tussock grass behind the beach. And owing to the traces of fool's gold in the rocks behind, it also offers a fantastic sunrise. When the sun hits the mountains behind, a beautiful golden glow comes off from the exposed rock. And we see here the elephant seal females, the larger ones, and the small elephant seal pups on the black objects. A couple of sub-adult males just learning to fight. These would probably be about 2.5 years old, and are still starting to display this behaviour and learn how to fight one another. And here we have a beach master, a fully grown adult male. The seal on the left is what we call a weaner, so that's a pup, still an older pup. And these larger seals are the ones which is a real draw. So early season, we will see these on the October trips, particularly November trips, there is a chance. And by the beginning of a new year, the majority of the elephant seals, adults, will have already left and gone to sea, and all that will remain are the elephant seal pups. There are generally a few sub-adults left around and occasionally a few females, but the large males will have headed off further south. And we can encounter these around the peninsula still. Again, this is a weaner, so a pup of around about 6 to 8 weeks old. The king penguin feeding its chick. And again, a tremendously photographic place. So it's as I say, without any doubt, it's a staff favourite place to go to, and we're privileged in that we can go to a few, and that speaks volumes. But with a photography aspect on it, Gold Harbour is recognised as being possibly the most photographic place on South Georgia. So again, there's multi-faceted ways of looking at it as to how it will affect your trip. Are you particularly into photography? If yes, then this is a perfect landing site. If you're just into enjoying the wildlife, all of South Georgia is great, and Gold Harbour particularly because of the density of it in this small bay. And this is a curious weakness, and this was taken in around about January time. And most of the adults, as I've said, have already gone, and you're left with the pups, and they're tremendously curious at this time of year in this state.
We have a specific question about the previous slides. Do you know when the adult male elephant seals fight? Is it typically in October, or is there a special moment for that?
Yeah, so the elephant seals will start to come out and hold their territory in around about September, and effectively start to claim their sections of beach. The females will also then come out, and really we're looking at October as being the prime time for the jousting elephant seals there. So the closer you can get to an October departure, the better chance you have of seeing these large elephant seals. And generally there'll be a few males hanging around until, it's hard to put an exact date on. If you said mid-November, and then from that point, the chances will get less with each day, essentially. And it's very much almost, it's like an aqua version of the Great Migration, that one day there'll be lots of seals, and then all of a sudden, over a short period, the majority of the adults, in this case the males, will go first. Some of the sub-adults will stay, and then the females will go, and then we're left with just a few sort of teenagers and youngsters left on the beaches, really. So it's quite an interesting way in the cycle of movement of these animals. I hope that answers.
Yep. Thank you very much.
We move along sort of the coast now to a place called Godsall, a tremendous anchorage, a really nice sheltered bay in South Georgia. And again, we can see here that the scenery is very impressive. And what's really good with this side is it gives us a chance for a nice leg stretch. So those who are feeling more active and able, we can get off near the Zodiacs at the beach, which is just out of sight here, and we can walk up amongst the tussock and onto the plains, and there we'll find a large colony of nesting gentoo penguins. And again, this is fantastic. Also here we'll see different bird life as well on this hike at this landing, and it's just such nice to see these birds, because we always associate them either with being on the ice or in the snow and being close to the water. But we'll see, particularly with chinstrap penguins, if you go to the Antarctica webinar, how they actually go a long distance away from the land. And particularly here at Godsall, it's good to appreciate this, especially once we've climbed up through the grasses. The giant petrel as well, it's a really good place to see nesting giant petrels. There are two types, a northern and a southern giant petrel, and these are massive birds. It's really hard to describe the wingspan. I think we're looking at around, from memory, around about 2 meters wingspan for these birds. And these are a very predatory bird. They will attack young penguins, and they'll chance their luck with seals as well, seal pups. But of course, in the great cycle of life, they also have their parts. And it's really nice to see these big prehistoric looking tube-nosed birds breeding up on the grasses here. So it's a really, really nice sight. If you walk far enough here with our guides, you'll be rewarded with this fantastic view along the coast. In the distance, in this direction, you'll be at St Andrews Bay. Further the other way, we'll be heading towards the Bay of Isles and that area. But it's a fantastic hike to just get this elevation and get this view along the coastline and appreciate the ruggedness of the coast, and think, you know, how these early explorers and the whalers survived here, and also how the wildlife manages to thrive. I think Ocean Harbour, it's not visited that often by other companies, and certainly it's one that I'm very keen that we go to, because of the variation that we can encounter here. It always gets good feedback from our guests who've been saying they've never heard of it before, and we're glad that they went. And it gives us a different aspect again on the whole of South Georgia. We have this wreck, the Bayard, which has been here for many, many years. It was originally actually wrecked after it blew away in a storm from a coaling jetty on the other side. But it's tremendous, and it shows how nature reclaims our influence. And on here we have lots of breeding blue-eyed shags. The grass has established itself on the wreck, and the birds now nest in there. We have these large kelp forests as well. And on the beach here is just something different. It was a whaling station for only a few years, and not much of it remains. But what does remain just sits beautifully, I think, in contrast with the nature around it. It's the only place you can see a steam locomotive on South Georgia. This one was left here when the whaling station was abandoned. It was too difficult to move it to another station. And we just see this industrial archaeology here. The only remains of the whaling station now are a building which is used as an emergency refuge, and some of the larger winching objects and the mooring posts, and occasional steam boiler, and I've already said that, the locomotive. And it's, I think, great to see the contrast of, you know, man's influence against that of nature reclaiming it. And this is a fantastic place to see the Antarctic fur seal and their breeding. So we have here the large male, we have the females, and there will also be the small pups running around as well. So they'll start to breed in December, and from that point on, the beaches and tussock grasses around South Georgia are awash with fur seal. Now, they can pose problems. They're very territorial and protective, so we just need to keep our wits about us when moving amongst them. But again, a beautiful species, and I'm often mocked among my staff for this, but they are actually my favourite Antarctic species. I think that their behaviour and their interaction is fantastic. Having studied behaviour, it's fascinating. I love watching these animals. A small cemetery as well. Actually, one of the oldest known graves in South Georgia is here at Ocean Harbour. And just around the corner, again, not too far from Godsall, actually, is Cobbler's Cove and Rookery Point. Now, this is a really good place to see this Macaroni penguin. So, at a glance, very similar in appearance to the rockhopper penguin. But we see here these beautiful yellow feathers. They're a lot larger on the Macaroni, and a slight difference in size as well of the penguin. But this is a fantastic place to see. We'll, again, try our utmost to get you to see these different species. And there are two options really here. One of them is a slightly strenuous hike over land, where we take you generally from the anchorage in Godsall by Zodiac to a drop-off point, and then you'll hike over and see the birds up on top of the cliffs at their nesting sites amongst the grass. If you're unable to do this, we'll also try and get you around the coast. So we'll take you in Zodiac, and we'll Zodiac cruise the penguins. So here we see the Macaronis, and this is at a place called Cobbler's Cove, Rookery Point. And Cobbler's Cove is the one where we drop you on land. But essentially, it's all the same nesting site. This is just the thoroughfare between sea and nest. And again, it's such a beautiful bird with these bright yellow feathering on their heads. And this is on a Zodiac cruise here at Rookery Point. And if you effectively followed the route up, midway between the people on the ridge line and when the hill goes out of sight is the nesting site. So the penguins climb up the rocks through the grass and have their nests on top of the ridge. On selected departures, we'll also go to Prion Island. So Prion Island is special for many reasons. It's of international significance as it's a breeding site for wandering albatross. It's a study site there for their populations and health, and has been for many years. We are only allowed to go there at certain times of year outside of the main breeding season. So if Prion Island is a must visit for you, if you travel with us, the earlier and the later trips for South Georgia, we will get the permits for. We cannot apply for the permit in the middle part of the season, but please contact us if you have further queries on this. So we need a special access permit to go there, and it's selected voyages, but it's absolutely fantastic. Again, on the times I've been here, it's been a real joy to watch these young birds crash testing themselves into the tussock grass, trying to take off, flying a few feet and then crashing into the tussock. Here, a young wanderer. And again here, it's not often that we'll see 5 wandering albatrosses together. And here just practicing as young birds, different rituals as part of their growing up process. So just across from Prion Island, we have another site of international significance, and probably one that you've also heard of as well, which is Salisbury Plain, which is the second largest king penguin colony on South Georgia. Has abundant Antarctic fur seals, and is also a good place to see the South Georgia pipits. And again, it's one of these places where the scale of the wildlife is unbelievable until you see it, and then you'll need to convince someone else to go there so they actually believe you. And it's great to see again these oakum boys and the young king chicks, and again a very impressive backdrop. A very slight change to how the colony is set up in its position. It's a lot more grass-based here, and a lot flatter compared to St Andrews Bay, and called Salisbury Plain by the British because of the resemblance to Salisbury Plain in the south of England. But a beautiful, beautiful place, and again, tremendous for these king penguins. And again, you know, we'll keep a good distance away from the birds, and a lot of the time the birds will actually begin to approach us out of curiosity. And this is the same across the different parts of Antarctica. The nature there is naturally curious, so we don't want to affect their behaviour. Likewise, for them, curiosity is part of their natural behaviour they display. And again, this is a view along the beach. This is from the landing site we use here at Salisbury Plain. And you'll walk off, you'll go up the beach and then follow the beach parallel to the shoreline across the grass to the main colony, which is just in this area here, underneath the pointed peak. And again, fantastic for the Antarctic fur seal. We'll mark the routes for you as well. We'll not only have staff along the route to help you, and this is one of our staff, Jerry, standing here, but we'll also put red poles along to help you as well, so you don't need to worry about taking the wrong route. And again, a beautiful place just to see the different wildlife together. And this is looking up the back. So if you remember, I pointed out the pointed peak just now. This is on the hill underneath there as such. And again, we can see this line of brown, which are the creches of the young penguin, interspersed with the adults in their full yellow plumage. And one of the highlights, there's a couple of endemic bird species here on South Georgia as well. And the Falkland pipit is possibly the most iconic one. So when I worked on the island, there was a dangerously low number owing to the rodent problems on the island. When I went back just over a year later on the ships, we could hear countless calls of these birds, and that's how quick the recovery process was. They were a dangerously low number. They believed there were 16 pairs left on the whole island in 2015 when I left. The eradication project to rid the island of rats and help these vulnerable species bore almost immediate results. And it brings a tear to my eye to think of it, and it certainly did at the time when I first returned and heard the call of these birds. Now, when we heard them before, someone would put on the radio, I think there's a pipit, and you'd spend a day looking for these small birds and not find them, to now being in the position where it's hard not to see them is fantastic. And we also have the South Georgia pintail, which is a type of duck, actually a carnivorous duck. It will actively eat dead flesh off of animals to survive down there. So that is it. There were other sites on South Georgia as well, but these are our key sites. There was too many to list in the time available on here, but please have a look at our website for further details on there. Once we leave the Falkland Islands, we're head to sea, and on the way to Antarctica, we'll stop at the South Orkney Islands. And again, I've showcased really two of our preferred sites here, which are the Orkney base and Shingle Cove. So Orkney is actually one of the site of one of the oldest research stations in the whole of Antarctica from 1902. And it's a really friendly site managed by the Argentine authorities, and we're always made to feel very welcome there. And there's the opportunity to buy station patches, but also to have some very nice coffee and biscuits with them. And this is base Orkney here on Coronation Island. A tremendous place, and it's a good place to get an insight into the research which goes on in Antarctica. And then also we'll endeavour to get you to a non-station landing here on the South Orkneys as well. And traditionally this is Shingle Cove, a nice landing site. And again, it gives you just somewhere different to explore. And here we see a aggregation of young male southern elephant seals. So again, the wildlife, as I've said, it will start to disperse, and this is one of the places we can find some of them here on the South Orkneys. And it's a nice hike to see the wildlife, to see the scenery of a place that, in the grand scheme of it, hardly anyone ever comes to. It's such a remote set of islands. And then moving on, we go back to sea, and towards Antarctica, we head to this place, to Point Wild on Elephant Island, the site where Shackleton's men under Frank Wild spent many, many months awaiting their final recovery after the Endurance sank, and a very remote, inhospitable piece of land on Elephant Island, but tremendous for wildlife. The chinstrap penguins here have a well-established stronghold and breeding site, and where we find penguins and rocks, essentially, we also find a good number of leopard seals, and this is one of the best places to actually see a leopard seal. Unfortunately, it's also one of the best places for them to try and puncture our zodiacs. But it's a tremendous landing site. And of course, the history here and the association with Shackleton. And here we have a bust of Louis Pardoe, the captain of the Yelko, the ship which ultimately rescued the 22 men from Elephant Island. From Point Wild, we will then head down to Antarctica. So with the Falkland Islands, South Georgia trips, there's some very important things to consider. And this is by no means intended to scare you, more to give you an awareness of the region we're going to. South Georgia is more isolated in regard to medical emergencies than Antarctica itself. The reason for this is there is no facility to have aircraft. In Antarctica, we have several options, the main one being at King George Island. But with South Georgia, we have to go either to Antarctica or to the Falkland Islands, which is at least 800 miles to the Falklands, slightly longer but better weather if we go to Antarctica. And these pictures were actually taken on one of our trips. And there's also a Royal Navy vessel here. Such was the situation that emerged. And this was owing to medical conditions of a guest. So please be honest when you fill out your medical form, and think of the potential impacts if you are not honest on this, because it has massive implications, not only for the rest of the voyage for people, but also for your personal liability. Now, this involved the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force and a search and rescue helicopter, owing to a incorrectly filled out medical form, should we say, and it affected the trip of everyone. So please, if you have a concern, please speak to any of us at Oceanwide. We're more than happy to advise you on there. Physical ability can also be a slight cause for concern. Getting in and out of the zodiacs in good weather on a nice beach is easy. However, South Georgia and the Falkland Islands can have very changeable weather conditions. So please just be aware of your ability for it, because the last thing that we would want to do is to have to not allow you to do a landing, or even worse, for something to happen to you whilst on one of our landings. I'm saying this isn't intended to scare you, but if you have any concerns at all, please do contact us and we'll advise you on that. But it's something that we need to make people aware of for these trips. Diving is one of our key activities. We do lots of different activities, I'm sure you're aware, and we are very privileged that we managed to dive at Point Wild this year. It's very few and far between people get to dive there, and we're actively looking to ways to do different things. And one of these is in the diving. So if any of you are members of a dive club and you'd look to put together a dive trip to Antarctica, we can add diving onto any of our trips. But this is subject to a minimum number of participants. And again, please contact us if you'd like to discuss these diving options more. And thank you very much for listening to me now. With this, I'll pass back to Franklin for the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Adam. Before I continue, I have a few questions for you. We have received a few questions. A question about South Georgia that might be interesting for everyone. Can you tell us something more, or maybe any concern or not, about this famous A68 iceberg? Some people are asking about this.
Yes, certainly. So A68A broke off several years ago, and owing to the size of the iceberg, it's one of the ones that's tracked, because obviously it can be quite dangerous to navigation as well as the environmental impacts on there. A68 was heading towards South Georgia and grounded just before Christmas time there. Because of the importance of South Georgia and the environment there, the Natural Environment Research Council from the UK, who are obviously closely linked because South Georgia is an overseas territory, dispatched a research ship specifically to monitor the effects of Alpha 68. In line with that, the Royal Air Force have also been flying overhead to look, and they were actually the first ones who noticed some big cracks in the iceberg prior to it starting to break up, which is now happening. With regards to the long-term impacts, it's too early to tell. The good thing is where it's grounded and the fact it's already started to break up, the effect should be almost negligible, you would hope. Obviously, as I said, it's too early to tell on this. One of the things with the icebergs, as we've already seen in the Ross Sea region, is where the icebergs block access for wildlife to get to their feeding grounds. With Alpha 68, this hasn't happened. So the feeding grounds are still open. And from what I understand of this, and certainly my personal belief on it, is that the iceberg being present there would actually do the ecosystem more benefit than negative. And this is because the icebergs hold a tremendous amount of nutrients, which can be used right from the very, very base of the food chain, right the way up to the apex predators, such as the leopard seals. Right. On there. So hopefully that answers that question.
Absolutely, thanks. Maybe another question. Well, we know these are expeditions, so there is never a guarantee. We're dependent on weather conditions. But how big is the chance of Elephant Island landings during these trips?
Elephant Island landings, landing there, I have set foot on there once and nearly been washed off of a rock last year, and that was literally for a couple of minutes. The chance of landing at Elephant Island is, in all honesty, remote. Quite often we can Zodiac cruise there, but there's a tremendous amount of swell which runs in that area, which just makes landing unfeasible and unsafe. So certainly if there is the option to land, we will seize it with both hands, because at a personal level, as a historian having the interest in the area as well, it would be a fantastic story to take home. But unfortunately the conditions make it difficult. So if we can, we will do all we can to land people there, but the chances of it are still quite remote.
Okay, thanks a lot. Maybe a question about the king penguin chicks. Is there a particular month or period to have a better chance to see them, or is can you say something?
The king penguin chicks have a different breeding cycle to other penguins. They have an 18-month cycle from egg or from breeding to fledging. And as a result of this 18-month cycle, all year round, there are penguins in different stages of development at the colonies. So to see these cute, brown, fluffy chicks, any trip, you would see them, fortunately. With the other penguins with chicks, it is more dependent on the time of the season. But with the king penguins, fortunately, because of the breeding cycle, it's year round.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. We will shortly we'll have to conclude the webinar because we're around time. Maybe I will shortly say something about, well, the current situation we are all in at the moment. As you know, we do not sail at the moment. Our ships are all in the Netherlands. But we are prepared, and we are preparing health and safety protocols like air filtration technology, upgraded cleaning measures, all of these things to make sure we are absolutely ready to go whenever it is possible again. So at the moment, our Arctic season for this year is still open, and we will update you on the situation, obviously, as soon as we have more information about that. Thank you all very much for your attention. Thank you, Adam, for your expert explanation. Really, really great to see all these magnificent images. And I hope to see all of you again soon. Why not on one of our vessels? Thank you. Have a good day.